Welcome back to Repairing Earth. This is your host, Emily Cristobal, and today we are joined by Haley Campbell, a climate adaptation specialist with the City and County of Honolulu, Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. Welcome, Haley.
Hi, thanks so much for having me here.
Yeah, so just to start off, I was hoping you'd tell me a little bit about what you do with the city and how you got involved.
Yeah, definitely. So I first began working with the city as an AmeriCorps Vista, which is a federal service program, and I served as a climate adaptation research analyst from August 2021 to August 2022, mostly focusing on our climate adaptation strategy known as Climate Ready Oahu and some of our equity work in the office. I then was fortunate enough to transition into a full-time role as an employee, a member of the staff, for the same group and working on climate adaptation now as well.
Wow, that's so awesome. And congratulations as well for, getting on full time to help us combat climate change here on Oahu. So I also heard in this climate adaptation strategy, you also created some games. Can you talk about what these games are called and just a little bit about them?
Yeah, definitely. So part of my team's role at the office is to help Oahu adapt to our 5 climate risks, which are also known as our hazards. And these include rising sea levels and coastal erosion, increased temperatures, sudden downpours of rain known as rain bombs, decreased precipitation island-wide, as well as increased likelihood of hurricanes. And so one of my roles as a Vista was to try and help design our 5th round of community engagement for our Climate Ready Oahu project, which builds on the back of previous engagement efforts. For this, we partnered with Malama Learning Center to host a series of workshops, and instead of doing the normal kind of panel discussion or lecture style presentation, we thought, why not do something more engaging with the community and really do something that could help inspire conversations and discussions around solutions for climate adaptation, which all led to the creation of the Are You Climate Ready games, which focus on sea level rise and heat adaptation solutions in order to kind of encourage these difficult conversations that communities need to have, and also the city, we're also having to figure out what on earth are we going to be doing to adapt to these changes that are going on in our communities. And the reason it focuses on these 2 hazards in particular is because our engagement was targeted toward Waianae and the North Shore, which are frontline communities facing these hazards most urgently right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, these games, although some may see them as just these climate ready games, they actually pertain to real life situations. And because of that, that's kind of why I brought you in today, to kind of walk us through using the games as a way to see into the future, even though it is not for sure what could happen, but kind of looking at Hawaii in 2100. And that's the year scientists say the world could face, quote, severe, pervasive, and irreversible consequences if greenhouse gas emissions are not cut to 0. And without major action, experts say global temperature is on track to rise by 2.5 degrees Celsius to 4.5 degrees Celsius, and sea level rise is predicted to rise by 3.2 feet by 2070. With that being said, can you kind of walk through how these games work and how they kind of reflect what could happen in the future?
Definitely, and a lot of what you were saying really exemplifies how climate change is complex and always evolving. We're always learning something new every single day, and so inevitably we're going to have to adapt to these changes that are coming to impact our island community. So the Are You Climate Ready games position participants as frontline community members that are forced to grapple with these future thinking concepts and trade-offs to understand how they might be able to manage risk under these different climate futures like the ones you just mentioned. And by planning ahead, working as a community and making the right choices, players can adapt to climate shocks such as coastal erosion and heat waves, as well as long-term stresses, including sea level rise and increasing temperatures. To win both games, though, everyone must be out of the different danger zones associated with rising temperatures and sea levels, because our communities are not well adapted if even one person is left behind. And though we don't have time to go through all of the rules of the games and all the exciting components, I just want to highlight that my favorite parts of the games are the opportunities to create your own strategies, as well as these community actions that can really bring people together to help everyone adapt and bring the community along with each other.
And you mentioned that the communities that you focused on were in Waianae and the North Shore. Why did you choose Waianae and North Shore as the communities?
So we chose to focus on Waianae and the North Shore because these are areas that were slightly underrepresented in our previous engagement efforts, but also are on the front lines of climate change, in some places more acutely than others, considering that there's one highway that might be connecting communities to get in and out of these areas. That highway that is projected to be impacted by sea level rise, right? And so we want to make sure that when we're talking about climate adaptation, impacts, and solutions, that we are prioritizing the areas that are going to be among the hardest hit and the more vulnerable first.
And you also went out to those communities and played the game with them. Can you kind of talk about the community response and if there was any of those strategies that they came up with in the game?
Yeah, definitely. So while playing the games, it was really interesting to hear different community members sharing their own stories of noticing how waves have changed over the years, noticing that it's gotten hotter, and noticing changes in the shoreline where they used to be able to play on the beach, and it's no longer there now. There's the ocean, so they can go snorkeling, but it's not the same as it used to be. And in particular, they noted how these changes seemed really small at first, but more recently they've noticed how they've added up to where we are today, which is a really strong indication and example of what climate change is doing over this future. It might seem small, but it really does add up to create these larger changes, which is why we should be proactive and acting now. And these all things can be avoided if we adapt now. And so by keeping up with current research and adaptation needs and getting out there in the community and learning from some of their own strategies and ideas, we're really better able to work together on meeting the needs of our frontline communities as we are trying to adapt to climate change. And in terms of strategies that people came up with on their own, there's so many, so I definitely encourage people to check out the games online. But I would say one of my favorites for beating the heat is something as small as going to get shave ice. Is a really small thing, but another awesome thing is going over to a neighbor's house and relying on neighbors who do have energy efficient air conditioning or cooler homes that have been able to be successful at adapting to the heat. Is really just coming together and being able to rely on your neighbors and community in different times of need.
That's such a great point. It's all like a community effort, and it's kind of changing that mindset that it's only about me or you, it's about everybody, and it's our job to work together to come up with solutions and be there for each other in the end.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about how we can all support each other as climate change unfolds and we see things that we haven't seen before, and we're learning all together at the same time how to make the world a better place, not just for each other, but for the future and those that come after us to be stewards of the Aina and this island as well.
Absolutely. And I was kind of hoping if it would be possible to just walk through a few scenarios of what we could possibly see in the future if we don't take action now.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really important point and something the games really tried to lean into. For example, with the sea level rise game, you already kind of mentioned in the beginning, right, we are predicted to see 3.2 feet rise in sea levels by 2070. And that feels like it's a long time away, but it's going to be happening in the lifetime of someone that was born in even, 2020 and the early 2000s, right? It's my lifetime as well. And so it's not really that far off if we're really thinking about it and trying to plan ahead. So we're seeing rising sea levels, we're seeing temperatures rise. Right now, we're even seeing a decrease in trade winds, which could increase as well in the future, making our spaces and communities and places of gathering a lot warmer, including the beaches that we all love to hang out at, right? It's really, really important to be thinking about how heat and sea level rise are going to be causing these types of impacts and what people can be doing, and that's what the games kind of get as, is walking people through these long-term stresses, but also shocks like heat waves that could happen, for a month in the summer, for example, and really impact people's daily lives in a different way than we've seen before.
From either your research or from hearing what the community is saying, what are kind of the needs that need to be addressed? What are they most worried about?
There's a lot of different concerns, right? Whenever you are talking with community, it's just as much about hearing of the concerns as it is about hearing what solutions and positive things that are happening already in the communities and places of gathering. For example, something I thought was really interesting is when we were at Kahala Farms and they were sharing how their efforts to restore the lo'i there resulted in creating this area of protection for them, their community, when there was a wildfire. Everything around that area was burnt, but their area was protected because of this restoration, that water that's being held in the ground now to kind of deter the wildfire from going to their community. And that's not, scientifically proven or anything. It's people's lived experiences, which are as important when thinking about climate change adaptation as the sciences. Both of them need to be working together. And so while there's a lot of different, concerns, I really do like to focus on the solutions that are being shared and learned in our communities as well as, through the science. And that's what we're hoping to get at sharing more about in our new climate adaptation strategy that we're working on.
Absolutely. And just asking more, trying to figure out more for the listeners of understanding how sea level rise impacts them and how heat waves, extreme heat can impact us. How does it impact people? Why should people care?
Yeah, why should people care? It's a really big question. I think you can kind of take this at multiple scales, right? It's something that we're looking through in our climate adaptation strategy. Island-wide, it can impact things like our infrastructure and our roads, where if the road is flooded, you might not be able to get to a hospital if you needed it in an urgent scenario. So that kind of seems like a big infrastructure thing, but it affects everyone differently. If you go down to the individual level, this could look like some people whose homes are right up on the shoreline. But that's, again, what we're working on and talking about, especially through the games that allow people to think through solutions and what could work and how they can angle things to fit their needs. And so there's a diversity of different things that are impacting communities when it comes to heat as well. A lot of it is kupuna and keiki who are either spending a lot of time inside where, if they don't have energy efficient air conditioners, it's going to be really hard to be thermally comfortable in these spaces. And if you're a kid and you love playing outside and it's really hot out, you might not be able to be out there for as long as you used to be. And so these types of things are affecting everyone now, but again, they'll also be impacting us in the future as well as things become worse in a way. And so that's, again, why you really want to focus on these solutions and kind of coming through with optimism and saying, here's a problem, but here's all different ways we're talking about of things that we can do to take action from the island scale all the way down to the individual level.
So you also brought up having better efficient air conditions to beat the heat. There's also obviously carbon emissions, cutting that, using electric vehicles or carpooling. What do you kind of say to people who look at these costs now and they're like, we can't afford that? Why do we have to make this change now? Is there another option, or how can you convince them that it's a better option?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And like most things in life, implementing adaptation solutions is not going to be free, unfortunately. But, for me, actually figuring out how much to put cost and income for people in these games to kind of make it more realistic but still in this game fashion was among the hardest elements to build into the game. And to simulate that we don't have all the same resources when implementing adaptation solutions, in the game everyone was able to roll 2 dice to determine their income. So some people had 5 tokens, and some people had 12, and some people had 2. It just really varied, and this resulted in some players being more easily able to adapt as compared to other players. And to kind of offset these issues where people have less and people have more and not really knowing how we're going to adapt together, we also created a community fund, because a lot of our communities have resources, and these could be in the form of funding, but it could also be in the form of people or existing buildings or farms and all of these things that we do have in our communities to kind of highlight that we can nudge players in this collaborative direction for adapting to climate change and in our efforts to leave no one behind, right? And just kind of as a note, players shared how these income disparities that were built into the game reminded them about how important it is to have radical collaboration when addressing climate change, and also invest early in solutions, as well as the importance of the aloha spirit as a social resource in adapting to climate change.
Yes, that's one of the things that stood out to me about these games, the focus on community. And I believe you mentioned this earlier, but also in the games, that if one person loses the game, everybody loses. And although that's kind of sad to hear, because obviously everybody likes to win, I think when it comes to climate change, that's such a great mindset to have. And I was kind of wondering if you could talk more on that.
Yeah, definitely. And when thinking about climate change and implementing solutions, it's important to recognize that not everyone is going to be impacted equally, and not everyone's going to have the same ability to adapt, otherwise known as adaptive capacity. So that's going to make it harder for some people to adapt than others. And at the same time, though, having these different capacities, I think, is also one of our greatest strengths in adapting to climate change. For example, the city might be able to mobilize policy needed to make adaptation happen, but the community will have the best knowledge about where to implement the solutions that are most meaningful to them, and also help support the most vulnerable community members. So working together across sectors and within different perspectives can help us indicate who may need more support and identify the different strengths and resources that exist that we can all leverage to leave nobody behind as we adapt to climate change. It also fosters important connections so that as impacts do unfold, communities are supported by those around them who can provide immediate support, including small things like checking on your neighbor or going to a neighbor's house. When, for example, if the highway is flooded and they can't get somewhere else, it's having that community around you at that time.
It is kind of a scary thought, thinking that a portion of Oahu could be cut off at like one point, and preparing for that now. And I think it's such a great way to kind of weave in these games, and I'm glad that you guys actually went out to the communities that are most vulnerable and that are being impacted, and the impacts are being seen now. Going back to more of the questions, why are playing and creating games like these important?
I think that solution-oriented games like the Are You Climate Ready games that we created can really help us start these hard conversations that we need to be having about what we should be doing to adapt to climate change. And it can also help players overcome any scary or overwhelming feelings that often accompany these types of discussions. And like you just said, it is scary to think about part of our island being cut off due to sea level rise. That is scary, but the games create this pathway to have these hard conversations and to really think about how we can work together to create solutions. And I want to note that we aren't the only ones that think so. The games were recently awarded the American Planning Association of Hawaii's Public Outreach and Education Award for their ability to inspire communities to come together to tackle climate change and implement these solutions for adapting to climate impacts. And so by focusing on what we can do as opposed to what we can't do, these games really create that pathway that can inspire these rich conversations and, moving towards solutions.
Yes, and congratulations. That's a really great thing that it's actually making an impact and organizations are seeing the power of these games and what they can mean for Hawaii and communities that live here. So, just to finish off, can you tell us a little bit about where we can find more information about these games?
Yeah, definitely. So you can learn more about the climate risks that we were talking about earlier that are facing Oahu and explore the game activities on our website, which is climatereadyoahu.org. And you can also on there find a set of tutorial videos. All of the materials are there to download, as well as a resource kit if you'd like to venture out and invest in any of the materials. But the games are made using pretty low-cost reusable materials, so we're hoping that they'll be really accessible to anyone that is seeking to play them. You'll also find a link to a survey to collect your perspectives on adaptation strategies that were created based on all of our community engagement, as well as the scientific research that has been conducted. And so I encourage everyone listening to find a group of friends and test your ability to beat the heat and be sea level wise through the games.
Yes, thank you so much. I really enjoyed just learning about the game, just talking about climate change.
Thank you so much for having me. And I should note that though they are, just games, they really are an amazing way to start conversations and to have these hard discussions that we need to be having. Again, while it might seem scary or overwhelming to be thinking about these impacts, it really is important to be proactive and be reminded that we have a community and we also have a plan that's being created by our office to address these climate impacts today so that we can be prepared in the future as they unfold.
For more stories like these, or for more episodes of Repairing Earth, head to hawaiinewsnow.com or listen wherever you get your podcasts. This is your host, Emily Cristobal, and mahalo for listening.